ICQ Podcast, episode 484, New Lead-Free Solder. Well, hello and welcome, fellow Amateur Radio enthusiasts, to episode 484 of your ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast, supported this episode by our monthly and subscription donors. In this episode, we join Martin, M1MRB, Martin, Mike 0, Sierra Golf Lima, Frank, Kilo 4, Foxtrot Mike Hotel, Bill, Whiskey Charlie 3 Bravo, and Leslie, Golf 0, Charlie India Bravo, to discuss the latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature is a look at a new lead-free solder. Well, as always, it's your very kind support and donations that keep your ICQ podcast advert-free, and we'd like to thank the monthly subscription donors for helping us out and giving us a base to help us pay our bills and keeping your show advert-free for you. If you enjoy your ICQ podcast, we'd ask you to consider us by going to ICQpodcast.com/donate, where it's a very simple solution we do. It's called value for value. So we ask you to take the value you found from the show, something that maybe you smile, laugh, learn, maybe a new product, something that the presenters are doing that's piqued interest, etc. Turn that into a monetary figure and send it our way. And everything we collect goes towards our running costs and keeping your show advert free and keeping the value coming. So please do consider us, as I say, at ICQpodcast.com/donate. To mention as well, our next digital talk group net will be taking place on Saturday the 6th of June at 1200 UTC to 1600 UTC. So please feel free to drop that into your diary for next weekend and come along and join us at that digital talk group net. Right, now we join the two Martins, Frank, Bill and Leslie, to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including government praise for hams and the mysteries of sporadic e-skip. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 484 of the ICQ podcast and tonight's news roundtable for that episode. Tonight, I'm joined by Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL. Hi, Martin.
Hello, good evening.
And welcome.
And welcome.
Yeah, good to have you. And we did some work last week together, so I dare say you can tell people about that later. Moving over to the States, we have Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH. Hi, Frank.
Hey, Martin. Hey, everybody. Great to be here today.
Good to have you. Also, your side of the pond, we have Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B. Hi, Bill.
Hey, Martin. Hey, everybody.
Yeah, good to have you. And back to our side of the pond, by popular demand, and Leslie's back.
Good evening, Martin and all. I've got the gremlins have been playing something rotten with my equipment, but hopefully we can get through this podcast without anything major going wrong. Over to you, Martin.
I hope so, because an hour before we were going to record, you were telling me that your computer had died and you were going to throw it out the window. So, yeah. Mr. Chris Howard, M0TCH, he's not with us today. He's on holiday, and I believe he's in New York State somewhere. Bill, you were checking up on him earlier on his posts on social media, but I think he's having a good time. Right, let's move to our first news story. And this is an interesting one. I'm going to get the guys in the States to go first. Senator Ted Cruz praises amateur radio volunteers for emergency work. Now, I'm going to give it to Frank first. What do you think, Frank?
Martin, this is a rare story, and I say that because there may have been a president, there may have been a vice president, they may have probably been a cabinet member, probably more likely, or senator, of which we have 100, have a public statement that's more than just a passing or cursory comment about ham radio operators and their role in emergencies. And Senator Cruz from the state of Texas, which has had floods and a lot of other problems there. The city of Houston, there being on the coast, is just a prime target for hurricanes and the devastating effects of both wind, but particularly rain and floods. And he really went on a bit at length in a public statement. Now, what's significant about this He sits as the chairman of the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. Now, there's a subcommittee on that, of which my Senator Roger Wicker, has in years past been on the subcommittee, which gives direct oversight to the FCC. So when they speak, the FCC listens because they want their budget to go through okay. So Senator Cruz has quite a bit of stature and leverage. And so he's talked about how important amateur radio operators are for emergencies and how they've responded in his state of Texas. So I'll let Bill pick up with that, but it's pretty significant in that this is a very prominent member of the U.S. Senate, and this has been widely circulated here in the U.S. And we have a bill about emergency comms that would give hams like who live in neighborhoods like I do, in HOA neighborhoods, a little bit of leverage to at least get dipoles and verticals up without being told no by the HOA. Bill, I'll pass it directly to you. Did you see this as being significant?
Yeah, it was a nice video, and it was nice that he put it out there. Real quick, you probably don't remember this because you weren't licensed back then, but I remember when Senator Goldwater was licensed. He was an active ham radio operator when he was in the Senate.
Right. I do remember that, even though I wasn't licensed. I do remember that.
I think he was out of office late 80s because that's when John McCain rolled in. But yeah, he was always a good one to popularize amateur radio. And I really like that he put the statement out, which was really nice. But unfortunately, I don't see his name yet signed on the Senate Bill 459. Yeah.
He can make it real, Bill. He can make it real.
I know, he can make it real. Just put your name on it, buddy. Run it through the committee. So, but yes, exactly what Frank said. There's been a grassroots effort with a bunch of organizations, ARRL being one of them, that I can't remember. There was another group that started this, but they were ARRL jumped in on it.
It's a Texas PAC that the Western Gulf Division Director, John Stratton, he's sort of involved with that. John's an attorney. He and I've talked about this quite a bit. So ARRL kind of saw that Texas alone was generating quite a bit of coin to put toward this. So you're absolutely correct.
And I signed this when it first came out because it's very important. But there's a House resolution 1094 and Senate 459, and it's exactly what Frank said. It does for amateur radio but the ability to put up a TV antenna for reception of broadcast television did.
That's OTAR.
OTARs, yep. OTAR, yep. You're not gonna be able to put a 70-foot tower up. No. But a thin wire dipole, which is I have a thin wire super loop in the backyard, which is exactly what I have. You're gonna be able to put up, near invisible dipoles or some vertical antennas. So you're going to get some accommodations versus right now it's zero accommodations, which is why Frank has the completely invisible antennas in his trees / bushes. And you have stuff in your attic, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So the whole idea on the bill, I think, is going to help start the conversation to get some stuff going here. The townships have been prevented from doing very much against reasonable accommodations for amateur radio since I think 1996. And this is just going to get us closer with HOAs. So it's really nice that he put out the statement. So I think it's a real good thing.
Yeah, sounds good. And in fairness, he might be going to become a ham himself. Maybe you can pressure him, Bill. Hi. But there have been sort of prominent people around the world that were hams or are hams. I mean, in fairness, King Hussein of Jordan was one. Just to name one, but there are others that have been quite active. Leslie, what do you think about this?
Oh, where do I start? Well, I did watched the video, and he came up with a couple of words, and the two words that sprung to mind was "thank you." And I think that's so important that when people are contributing to their country, by whatever means, be it amateur radio, by whatever means at all, and when somebody prominent says thank you, I think that's a really good thing. It's also a good thing to have politicians actually on side for once, and I think that's how can I put this? Sadly lacking here. We do have our local MP when we have the local fete, and he comes along and shows his face and says hello to everyone, and we've got pictures of that. So we try and garner support, which is a good thing. As far as the accommodation on HOA is concerned, there is a similar petition going on in this country, because it's actually quite difficult without proper advice, to put things up. So some amateurs, and I only say a very, very small number, decide to put up what they like, and that doesn't go down too well. Do I think it would go through here? Probably not. I think it's the wrong time. However, they do have a similar thing in Italy where, like you said, you can't put up huge towers, but you can put up wires and things like that. So it'll be interesting to see where all this goes. But I do think it's very important to keep politicians on side and hopefully support the hobby. Over to you.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah. Keep the politicians on side. Martin, last words on this one?
I agree with you, keeping politicians on side. You mentioned about people, like prominent people that were licensed or into amateur radio. I don't know why I thought this, but I had a feeling that Prince Philip might have had something to do with amateur radio. I think he was a patron maybe of the national body.
He was.
Was he licensed? I don't know. I never know that. I did hear a couple of rumours from different places that said he might be, but either way, never heard him on the air, never got to work him. Praise for amateur radio, it's all good. If it's praise, especially from it's a politician. For those of us outside of America that don't know much about American politics, with the obvious exception of what's on the news at the moment, what is a senator? Where are they in the pecking order of politicians? Are they just like the equivalent of ordinary MPs? My understanding was like a senator was like potential next president, but maybe I got that wrong.
Very often that happens. John Kennedy was a senator who became president. Senators often run. If you look at the three branches of government, you have the executive branch led by the president, of course. You have the judicial branch led by the Supreme Court, which is varied in its number. They have a chief justice. And then you have the legislative branch, of which there are 100 senators, and Bill, help me out here, a couple of hundred or more.
452.
Yeah, members of the House. House is based on population,
Right.
whereas the Senate's based upon 2 per state. And so, they're very powerful, and the House generates a bill on money. The Senate has a lot of approvals over cabinet appointments and things. So, Martin, Rothwell, it's a bit different than on your side of the pond, but you shouldn't have off, dadgummit. We'd have what you have.
But the thing is that this guy is he's not just a nobody in like the American politics system. People. He's someone that's worthy of making these comments and giving good.
Very significant in my opinion.
That's good. That's the main thing. So in which case, praise for amateur radio from someone that is significant. That is all good.
Well, it's got to be good if it gets it out into the public eye. So I really appreciate that. Move to our next news story. Project presumes mysteries of Sporadic E. Now, Sporadic E happens about this time of the year, and we understand some about it, but there's an interesting project about to happen, and I'm going to get Frank to go first because you know this gentleman, don't you?
Yes, we've corresponded. He lives one state over from me in Louisiana. Lloyd Van Horn, W4LVH, is a very active broadcasting DXer, probably more well known for his AM broadcast DXing work. He runs a website called DX Central. and puts together lots of information there. One, if you just have time on your hands, you'll look at his YouTube channel, watching him build his broadcast DX studio a few years ago, in addition to a ham shack. You'd be amazed. And he has a substantial antenna system in the non-ham radio realm. His mother, Gail Van Horn, very prominent author herself, and is a writer for Radio World and co-founder of Teak Publishing. She and her husband, who's Silent Key now, they worked with Monitoring Times up in Brasstown Ball, North Carolina, back when that operation was, fairly significant and a going thing. That gives you a little bit of a context for this. Lloyd has compiled a database of about 95,000 FM broadcast logs from North America, putting them out in both spreadsheets as well as interactive visualizations. And so this is a pretty significant element that parallels what Whisper and the Reverse Beacon Network and PSK Reporter do for HF and the HamSci organization and doing analysis of that. So I'll leave it there, but I see it as a very significant project that will help us both on FM broadcasting, but will leverage our knowledge for the ham radio bands of looking at DX, certainly, on 2 meters.
Yeah, fine on that one, Frank. Now, Leslie, I know you're predominantly a HF person, but
Yes.
This could be of interest, couldn't it?
Yeah, certainly. I think we ought to sort of mention what Sporadic is. I mean, from a UK point of view, you could be in London having an operation on your handheld, 5 watts or whatever, or in your car, and all of a sudden you get signals from Holland and the continent absolutely crashing in at S9. And it could be through various reasons, wind shear, ionospheric conditions at the time. And I think it's, from what I understand, he's trying to work out the mechanism why this is so and why it happens, which, to be honest, we don't know fully. And it needs more research. I think it's very, very interesting indeed. I'm predominantly a HF person, but I do mess about with VHF and UHF occasionally. And when you're on Sporadic, boy, you know it. Over to you.
Oh, yeah, you certainly do. I've had a couple of very, very interesting contacts, which were put down to Sporadic. Martin, what's your thoughts on this one?
Do you know, I'm having a look at this website. Obviously, it's very US based. There's transmitter network maps and things like that. And there's looking at where the transmitters are. It's actually quite interesting to see like the main powerful ones are in the middle of the states. There's lots of the smaller ones towards the right. But to the left-hand side, the west side, there's not as many, which is that in itself is quite interesting too. There's certainly lots of data there. I know there are sort of maps that show you when there is Sporadic available, but I think a lot of that is just based on the standard DX cluster. Obviously, this is for broadcast FM, 88 to 108, or thereabouts. So maybe you can pull some data for this for 2 meters or 4 meters. I do wonder how accurate it is, because when you look at things like in America, their FM transmitters are insanely high power. 150 kilowatts FM versus 4 or maybe 10 kilowatts for our most powerful FM transmitters in the UK. Okay, it's a bigger space you've got to cover, but I do wonder how accurate that would be by comparison to some other places. Not just out of interest, but it's a fascinating resource. It's definitely worth having a look at and having a play with. Talks about frequency and maximum usable frequencies and things like that, but things you wouldn't necessarily think of. But it looks like a fun project.
Yeah, that's what I thought when I put it in. Bill, last words on this one?
Not much to add. I think everybody covered it well. It's nice that someone's trying to collect a little more data, and it's out of the ordinary than what we're used to getting. We're used to getting stuff that's focused on the ham bands, but this might give a clue. And exactly like what Martin just said, I really wonder if we can start associating data from this with openings on 4 meters and 2 meters. Because exactly like you guys mentioned, there's been some sporadic E-skips that it's been a while, but there were sporadic E-skips back in the 90s that I couldn't explain. You look at the maps and that kind of stuff, and you look at the data they collected back then, and you just really didn't have a real good idea why that path was open to the, for me, the one time it was the West Coast of the U.S. It's like, that makes no sense. Canary Islands, yeah, that makes sense. West Coast, that really didn't make a sense. There's a lot of ground between there. But I think with other resources like this, we'll get extra data points, and maybe we'll start being able to explain some of these sporadic mysteries.
Yeah, I think every survey and every experiment and looking into these things is certainly worth doing. And if it's happening on one frequency, the broadcast frequencies, it will be happening also on our frequencies as well. So well worth a look. And as I say, I'm pleased this is happening. Move to our next news story. There's an open source software modem called a Vara replacement. Bill, you probably know more about this than most of us, so I'm going to let you go first.
Yeah, there's a project out there by a group. I believe they got ARDC funding a couple of years ago, but they're releasing a product called Mercury. It's an open source software modem. They're calling it a replacement for Vara, which is a HF. I use Vara HF. There's also Vara FM. It's a closed source Windows program that we use with WinLink. I mainly use it with WinLink. And, it works. That works well. So if this has similar or better performance, I think it will be good. They did talk about, because it's open source, they have a GitHub out here, and it's compatible with Windows, Linux, several non-Intel architectures. Shack PC here is a Raspberry Pi 500. So, here in the next couple of weeks, I'll download it and see if I can get it compiled up and working and see how well it works. I don't think it's going to plug into WinLink. I think it's designed to plug into their project, High Frequency Emergency and Rural Messaging Exchange Systems, Hermes. It's a modem, software modem for that. But the Mercury project is now on version 2, and they're writing lots of improvements for it. I looked at the releases on the version 2 stuff. Well, this is version 1.98. But I mean, there's activity. So yeah, version 2 started 1.96. So they've been cranking out code here. It looks like every few days. Lots of fixes, lots of feature adds as I'm reading through these notes. So I think it's something to keep an eye on, especially if it's something that works on all the platforms. Somebody gets this working for, Mac, Windows, Linux, Raspberry Pis, other small board computers and tablets. It'll take off like crazy. So I think it's something to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I agree with you, Bill. And open source is always something I'm always pleased to see because, yes, I do have a Windows computer, Windows 11 computer. I have one. I've got more Linux machines in the house. But if you can run it on any platform, then that's got to be good. Frank, let's pass it over to you and see what you think.
Let me just add to what Bill, great description from Bill. Let me just add something that may reduce some confusion. It's called Hermes as an acronym for High Frequency Emergency and Rural Multimedia Exchange System. Now, listeners who aren't into Vara and into this particular architecture and mode of communication might go, Hermes, isn't that an SDR? Well, there's a Hermes Light 2 SDR radio, which I happen to have, but this hasn't anything to do with that directly. The software for the Hermes Light 2 is commonly called Thetis, although some other software packages will operate with that. So I agree with what Bill had to say. I think it's a very interesting project. As he said early, I suspect it will trickle out here as it gets polished off. And this is a good investment by ARDC. So their money's doing some good things here.
Well, it does prove that there's a lot of development work still going on within amateur radio. And, lots of things that we take for granted today came from ideas from people in amateur radio. So I'm pleased this is happening. Now, mine, what's your thoughts on this one?
Do you know what? Every time I hear the word modem, and I know people sort of inaccurately talk about modems, things like you connect your broadband lines and things now, but I think back to the sort of the days of dial-up modems and those wonderful little squeaks and whistles and things that they used to make, which is brilliant. I used to love that. I like the fact that this is compatible with Windows, Linux, and other non-Intel architectures. So yeah, that does suggest it might work with a Raspberry Pi and things like that. Excellent. So even better. Product will support things like store and forward file transfer over HF. Now, the cheeky part of me thinks, why don't we try and do this and try and send some part of this show over there? I don't know the limits on that. It probably won't be very much more than a text file. Otherwise, we'll be there for absolutely ages. But that sounds like a fun thing to do. I've never played with software modems or anything like that, but the fact that it's software modem makes me think this will probably use the sound card, be that your Signal Link or your inbuilt sound card in your radio. So this might be something we could just download and have a play with. If only I had an aerial up. Otherwise I would be doing something, but my aerials are all down at the moment, which is quite disappointing. But yeah, it sounds like a fun thing to play with.
Yeah, it certainly does. And the interesting thing is, as I say, it's more development. Now, Leslie, probably not something that excites you, but what do you think?
I think it's very interesting. I've been listening with interest. What I learned is way, way, way out of date and long gone since these systems have come into place. So I look at it with interest. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah. Well, I remember back in the early 80s, we had 300 baud modems.
Yes, the old teleprinters.
Yeah, those as well. I had a modem where you dialed the phone with the phone, and then you stuck the phone handset into
That's right, yeah.
Acoustic couplers. You've been watching War Games.
No, I have one. I had one for a while. Oh, it was terrible.
Please don't laugh at this, guys, but I still have a Tono 7000E teleprinter.
I'm not laughing at it. It's probably worth a fortune.
He sends his grocery order in on it.
It still works.
Yeah.
Leslie Butterfields, the only man still using a telex machine.
I was going to say it's heavy, so be careful lifting it.
Yeah.
No, you just plug it into the back of your TV. It's just the old phono socket. Plug it in the back of there, and it'll work fine.
Yeah, but you need an analog TV, Leslie. There ain't many of those about. Anyway, let's move to the next one before we call this the Reminiscence Show. Okay, next news story. Aris announces plans for a moon-based ham radio station. So, go on, Martin. I'll let you go first on this one. What do you think?
Well, I've started reading this. I'm like, you want to put an amateur radio station on the moon? I mean, the first thing is that it's either going to get constantly bombarded or it's not going to get very much activity at all. I mean, moon bounce is quite hard just to get a signal to hit the moon, irrespective of the fact that there might be something up there to repeat it back to you. But it's 5 gigahertz or 10 gigahertz. So that, I guess, makes it a little bit less, not as easy to get into. If you're using like 70 centimeters or 23 centimeters to get up there, in theory, it's relatively easy with a big enough antenna. 5 gigahertz or 10 gigahertz, you've got to be into your microwaves and things like that. You can get things like for QO100, the geostationary satellite, I don't think you can quite get stuff off the shelf for that. If you're running 5 or 10 gigahertz from the moon, you probably can't get just an off-the-shelf component. But I do wonder with things like this, and I guess it's the same thing with satellites and things like that. Who licenses it? Who says, yeah, you can use 5 gigahertz or 10 gigahertz or whatever? Because that's essentially beaming down over the whole planet, wherever, in relation to where the moon is. So it's not like the US could say, yeah, you can do that, because, people in another part of the world, in Europe, might say, actually, you can't, because we need those frequencies from that bearing to do something else. I don't know. I'm curious who gives that permission, but it's certainly an interesting project for ARIS, and one that I think we should watch with a bit more interest.
Yeah, well, I think this is an opportunity to get youngsters in to the hobby. If you do have a base up there that's got a ham radio station, it's a bit like having astronauts on the ISS to always have a ham radio license. It'll be nice, and it's not like moonbouts, because once they've received you on their aerial, they're transmitting back. You're not getting diddly squat bounced off the moon back to you. So that would be a lot easier. And I'm guessing, because most of it is clear, nothing in the way, predominantly, you won't need phenomenal power coming back from the moon, my guess. Leslie, what are your thoughts on putting a station on the moon? CQ Moon, eh?
Or SOTA or POTA, I don't know. You can't put the equipment on your back and go for a walk, certainly not. Anyway, no, I was reading through the information. It talks about a feasibility is being studied. So all these things will be looked at. The trouble with doing it the way we're doing it is you need a very, very good station. And yes, some amateurs are capable of that, but the amount of attenuation off the Earth's surface. Now, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I think it's in the order of about 170, 180 dB. So that really just doesn't make sense. There has to be some way of reducing that attenuation so it can be used by normal equipment as opposed to something that's put together specialised. And I'm sure this feasibility project will look into that type of thing. So that's the only thing I've got to say. But it certainly does spark the interest, and it will keep young people, because they like space. It's all sexy stuff. So anyway, over to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems at all, mate. No problems at all. Well, as I say, that's how I feel about it. Frank, what's your thoughts on this one?
Martin, it's very intriguing, and I think the other presenters have raised some excellent points here. Japan's already transmitting Morse code from the moon from their 2024, January 19th of that year, touchdown with 2 small lunar surface probes. I think that's on 70 centimeters, if I'm right. But be that as it may, having this particular moon station, a couple of things I will add. This is a joint effort between ARIS and AMSAT. Listeners may recall Bill and I interviewed the president of AMSAT a couple of podcasts ago, and it was very clear that they got a lot of stuff going on, and they don't have any paid members, and it's all volunteer. The second thing, as Martin, you just mentioned, there's been at least a loose confederation of activity between particularly NASA here in the U.S., but other agencies as well, between amateur radio operators and interstellar, types of things. And so that's a good thing that we continue to do that. Having a moon-based ham radio will complement what we've done with monitoring signals from Voyager and a lot of the other things that we've certainly done. So I see it as a really good thing. But I will say, Bill and I called it, that the ARL DXAC needs to get moving, because it takes them forever to make any changes in the DXCC entities. So you need to get a slot for moon-based contacts there. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, well, as I say, very interesting. And Bill, Are you going for this DXCC or not?
Of course. That might be what, 341 or something like that, Frank?
Something like that.
A lot of stuff in here that I want to catch up on from all the way back to what Martin said all the way through. Generally speaking, space satellites and frequency allocations are coordinated through the IARU, International Amateur Radio Union. They have a panel that meets periodically to do the coordination, and they'll just be in there for that kind of stuff. And there's a whole bunch of documentation on their website. I was scrolling through it here, and I got distracted because I want to click on it. But it's a joint effort between AMSAT and ARIS, which is the amateur radio on the International Space Station group. They're coming out with a hardware prototype called CAVIRE, Communications, Audio, Video, and Imaging Using Amateur Radio. And this I'm getting a lot of deja vu off of this while I'm reading this kind of stuff. And the reason why I say that is, Frank and I did interview the AMSAT president, and I was focusing on golf and Golf T, which is the next generation of, satellite payloads they're trying to work up in the, 3U form factor and that kind of stuff. The original goal, getting a little higher, doesn't sound like it's feasible with the current commercial launch options. But one of the other things that was hanging out there about 6, 7, 8, 9 years ago, maybe, was the Phase 4D project. And the idea is let's get a geostationary satellite up to cover the northern hemisphere or the western hemisphere of North America and South America. And that was going to be digital. So the Phase 4D project, they're working on the hardware to maybe get on a commercial satellite. I still think that's still out there. I didn't specifically ask the MSAT president that line of questionings because the golf project's clearly a near-term realistic thing, and this was more of a visionary, hey, if we can get on a geostationary satellite. Well, they were talking about using digital voice on there and other digital modes and imaging, and they had a tentative band plan, but there was an open source project hanging out there that was going to be the Phase 4D base station, basically. So the idea is that you would follow these, I don't want to say blueprints, kits, we know some company would have made a commercial product out of it, but the idea being is if you do the following things, so you're uplinking on 5 gigahertz and you're receiving on 10 gigahertz, here you go. This is what you're going to need to get on the air. Relatively straightforward. And that got really far. I used to be on the mailing list on that, and there's just way too much noise because there's a lot of developers on there, hashing out details as they were doing stuff. So I think that's a possibility here. So I'm wondering if there's going to be overlap between those open source projects and what this caviar system, which rolls back to Leslie's point. The reason why they were talking about digital modes and 5 and 10 gigs is because of that attenuation factor with the atmosphere. 5 gigs cuts up through the atmosphere with relatively low power. 10 gigahertz downlinks from the atmosphere, relatively low power. And if you go from an analog signal and go to the digital signal, you'll get some improvements and gains there. So, the whole, I've been talking here for who knows how long at this point, but way too long. But the point being with all of this is I think a lot of pieces are either exist or close to existing, that this is actually going to be a real thing. So that as soon as we get a mission where we actually start putting gear on the moon, they could drop this thing off and just have it. The moon is tidal locked, just have an antenna facing towards Earth, and then we track the moon from our end, which is Satnogs and all that other stuff currently tracks the moon for moon bounce. So I think this is going to be a real exciting possibility. I know from my few times I was doing moon bounce in the past long ago, we had to have on VHF and UHF, we had to have significant power and significant gain. And it was about like a second up and a second back. So there was like this built-in 2-second delay. But by doing a data mode, you would store and capture, and you would have maybe a little bit longer delay, but I think it would be a more robust signal with a simpler station. So I'm very excited about this. I didn't go to Dayton, and I should have. just there's like 3 or 4 forums that happened at Dayton that when I saw the notes from them, I'm like, I should have went just to go to the forums this year. And Dan gave me a hard time. Thanks, Dan, because he posted some great day 1 summary, day 2 summary, and day 3 summaries. And he was POTA activating on the way down and POTA activating on the way home. He had a great time without us. Thanks, Dan.
Bill, the money you save by not going can be a down payment on an ICOM 905 to get you up to 10 gigahertz.
Well, that's the other thing is I'm not sure what exists commercially at this point, but I think by this being a thing, there will be some stuff. But I pay way too much attention to a satellite I can't even hear. I am constantly looking at what people are building for QO100, which there is no way I will ever hear that thing from here. I am way too far north and way too far west. But I just love all these people building these projects. I keep seeing photos online or videos or little clippets where they're having QSOs and stuff. And it is completely fascinating. It is like, that's any kind of project like this that's going to get us the more widely doing this kind of experimenting. I think it's going to be loads of fun.
Bill, not to hog the jumping in here, but one of the things that stimulated my interest in all of this radio technology, besides just listen to WLS Chicago in middle of Georgia, at night, was an article in Reader's Digest about these 2 young Italian kids that built their radio stuff out of plumbing and junk parts to listen to the Soviet cosmonauts, the Russian cosmonauts. And they tracked, they said, when the one who died and Russia didn't want to report it. And I may have some of that wrong, but that's a little fuzzy. But boy, that was so exciting to me that 2 people about my age through junk stuff could build something that could listen to space like that. That was sort of fugitive knowledge. It wasn't a commercial thing. And this is terrifically exciting.
I agree. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, as I say, it does sound fun. And going back to the last podcast you 2 weren't on, or the 4 of you weren't on, they talked about doing Dxpeditions and putting a shack in a box on an island and working it remotely. I wonder, would you put a shack in a box and stick it on the moon?
Yes. I wrote a blog for Dan on that probably 6 or 7 years ago because, with the current technology, we just had a very successful, I'm going to mess the island name up, Deloche Island off of Puerto Rico. That was all solar panels, Starlink, and Flex radios. It was like, it was Flex. And it was all shack in a box. They dropped it off and they went back to, adjust the solar panels a couple times, and they were not on the island at all then. And it was a huge Dxpedition. And I think that's, once we get that stuff nailed down to where they just drop it somewhere, I think that they'll be able to do something very similar with, asteroids, the moon. I think we're closer than most people realize, I think, on that stuff working. Because once you break it down to the data frame and you're just keeping a data connection going between, power, temperature control, data, antenna management, once you get those things solved, there's some pretty exciting stuff that could be going on here.
Yeah, certainly is. And we need to keep an eye on this one. Moving to our last news story, and this is a nice one, really. Young ladies are getting more and more involved in the hobby. And here we're talking about helping girl guides earn licenses in the Caribbean. So, I know it's not in our part of the world. Leslie, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, I think it's a good thing to get more young ladies in the hobby. In fact, it's a good thing to get more radio amateurs into the hobby. And the other thing is I picked up is that they have suffered in that part of the world with very, very, very bad weather conditions. So it's putting the communication systems into place, and people and youngsters will have eventually the skills to do it. It's all good, and it gets more people into the hobby, which is a very good thing, Martin. Over to you.
Yeah, certainly will, mate. Certainly will. Frank, what's your thoughts on this one?
This is a great story. I've talked a bit in previous podcasts where we've covered getting girls particularly into amateur radio. That the important thing is to create the space for them to thrive, and so it's not
absolutely
sort of a male-oriented world just because there are more males in it, more male adults in it. You get a structure there that somehow they go, well, gosh, do I fit in here? And so doing this opens the door. And we've talked about Girl Guides versus over here in the States, Girl Scouts, the younger version of which were called Brownies, if that's still the case. And doing this produces a space for which they can thrive and succeed. And I just see nothing but a win on that one.
Yeah, I see it as a win all round, Frank. So, yes, I agree.
Well, and let me add, we have a very prominent ham, Rhea Jiram, N2RJ, who is from the Caribbean, from Trinidad and Togo, as I recall. So there's one example of someone as a role model who has been very successful, been on the board of ARRL, now on the board of ARDC. So there you go.
Yeah, certainly is. Bill, what's your thoughts on this one?
Not much to add other than it's good. My introduction to amateur radio was, through the Boy Scouts, and, as long as we get everyone introduced at a young age to the possibilities of amateur radio, that's good. Just one real quick one there. I don't know if Frank has noticed, but Rhea is writing a Flex Radio client for Android.
I saw a note of that.
That is incredibly exciting. So she is busy.
Once again, as I've said quite a few times tonight, it just proves that amateur radio is not stagnant. There's a lot going on. And guys, we probably don't know the half, and I'm being honest about that. Martin, last words on this one?
Well, it's always a good thing. I was just reading the story here. In early May, 32 girl guides got their introduction to radio since radio science and the radio experience with the help of Associate President. They learned how two radios worked, participated in simulated disaster drills using handheld radios within the school compound. Absolutely fantastic. You got some kind of introduction to it. You get an idea of what you can do with it. But what it doesn't say in the news story, at least that I can find out, is whether any of them actually got a license as a result of this. I'd be curious to know, but either way, regardless of whether they did, they didn't, it is one of those things we've talked about before. If you're showing people the tech and the things that you could do with amateur radio, that is going to, it might not excite everybody, but if you can get somebody excited by radio, even if it's just one person, that's one person more that, is going to go away and think, do you know what, I'd like to learn more about that. They're going to contact their local club or wherever and hopefully get their license. So, he's good on them.
Yeah, good on them. And just an aside story, a few months ago, Colin and his wife were over visiting us, and I was playing with a new analog radio, and I connected it to my hotspot, just testing it, and connected to the hotspot, and worked a gentleman in Western Australia. It wasn't my friend Phil, it was another guy. And Sandra said, you worked Australia on that little thing in your hand. I had to come clean and tell her.
Yes.
Yeah, I had to come clean and tell her that yes, I did, but it was there were internet involved, but it was still RF both ends, and so sometimes it can really impress people. But yeah, let's say it's good. Right, let's find out what the guy's been up to since the last time we spoke. So going down the list, Bill, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
I have been working some FT8, a little bit of POTA, a little bit of SOTA. But the main thing I've been doing is experimenting with the Ether SDR client for Flex Radio. That's an open source project. Last couple versions came out and they fixed some problems, so it works okay on the Pi. So I've been using my Raspberry Pi 500 as my Shack PC. I don't know if I mentioned that before. And so I've been working on that, and that's why I've been doing a lot of FT8 and a little bit of SSB. I still got to figure out how to integrate my keyer into it with the Morse. Still working on that, but this product is they're finally what they call it the gold release. They started calling it 2026.5. whatever. So it's like ready for prime time basically, and the amount of features and fixes that they've done on this is just mind-boggling. It went from nothing to Bill's making QSAs on it in probably about 3 months.
But Bill, wasn't that vibe coded?
Yeah, he uses Claude, and it's Jeremy. Yep, and Jeremy got a few other folks punching in there now because there's like 33, the magic number, contributors now. So folks have did pull requests and started doing their own fixes and then trying to put them back in the repo. But, there's documentation now. Someone has made documentation for it already. And it's phenomenal. It just uses the Flex Smart SDR series, signatures, that the name brand they use. So it works with my Flex 6600 and it's pretty impressive. The other thing going on is the dog was barking earlier because the FedEx guy showed up with my package from Turkey. And in that is this itty bitty little QMX transceiver. I finally joined the cool kids and I now have this itty bitty little QRP Labs QMX. So I have to set a power cable up here a little bit later and we'll start messing around with that and see how that goes.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it's exciting. I'm shocked how small it is, by the way. Measuring it and then actually holding it is two different perception in my mind.
Oh, yeah, I've got the QMX Plus, but yes, the QMX is real nice little radios.
The QMX Plus has everything in room for you to put stuff in, and that's still tiny. For what it is. It's very impressive stuff.
Yeah, and it's not a stop-still operation. Hans is doing a lot of firmware upgrades all the time, which is quite nice. So that's a good one. Frank, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Well, I will answer that question. Let me tag on to Bill briefly. I've been following the Quantum SDR project, which is partly in England and partly in Arizona.
I have one I'm using as a PAN adapter on my KX3.
Good. So you kind of know that it also works with the QMX Plus. So there you go.
I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah. And that really ramps up the potential for the QMX Plus as well. Okay. What have I been up to? Well, I have been on drugs, but they were prescribed by a surgeon. So I had rotator cuff surgery on my dominant right shoulder.
So you are holding.
I am holding. In fact, I was holding the day before my surgery. I wanted to have that, and it happened to be oxycodone, which I'm not a big fan of. I just a little scared of that addictive thing, but only used it for 2 days. Rotator cuff, right arm, shoulder. I'm right-handed. That was on May 7th. and things went very well. I just got my right arm out of a sling, and I'm still doing physical therapy every day. And what's interesting about this is that if you think about in the olden days where we had tubes and tires, you run over a nail, it punches a hole in the tube, they patch it, you scruff it up, you put glue on that and let it dry, put it back in, there you go. You're riding along again. Well, they used what they call a cow patch on my torn rotator cuff, and it's built from a cow's Achilles heel in a product called Regenitin, which is collagen based, and it's put over the rotator where it's torn, and it's stitched or stapled or some other medical procedure to the tendon, and it grows into the tendons. I mean, they merge. And so in 6 months, it's supposed to be stronger than my original rotator cuff. And I had a physical therapy surgeon meeting today with the nurse who was the attending during the surgery, and she went over the whole kit and caboodle with me. So I'm back. I now can have 2 hands on the keyboard for a few hours a day instead of typing left-handed on my iPad. So that was one thing. And my right shoulder now feels more or less like my left. In terms of ham radio, I bought an Anytone AT890 UV, mostly for what we've been talking about today, satellite work. As I finish getting that set of gear, I do have an arrow antenna. Got to think about how I want to mount it and some things like that. And that caused me to dig more into my DMR code plug development for 2 or 3 other DMR radios that I have, as well as hotspots. Found out a little odd note that some hotspots, if you tell it the DMR mode is repeater or DMO simplex, it will work. Some others it won't. I happen to have one that it wouldn't. So learned a little more about DMR. Far from an expert, but been delving into that a good bit. Thirdly, I'm giving a talk to Rat Pack, a group developed on the West Coast. Rat Pack is an acronym for something I don't really remember off the top of my head. But that'll be tonight, which is Wednesday. This podcast drops on Sunday, so it will have been recorded and put out on the Rat Pack YouTube channel. It's about my POTA research, which is basically there's a clear market for hams to activate local or municipal parks, especially for technicians. And there's a working group doing the planning for an alternative parks program because POTA Inc. has said definitively that they're just not going to do that. And that's clearly their choice. But nobody owns a park like no ham owns a frequency. So a group of us are looking at whether or not an all parks activated, for lack of a better term, might be useful. So if any listeners are interested in joining that work, drop me a line. I'm good on QRZ. I know it gets cold in Connecticut, but I never realized it would get this cold. I have an article in the July QST that got the final galleys for and got the note that it's been published and it will be circulated soon. And it's about MCOM information sources for Club Aries websites. I used a signals intelligence perspective, got former students that work for NSA. What sources of information would make MCOM teams more valuable to their served agencies? With FirstNet and with hardened facilities, just the ability to communicate is still valuable, as Senator Cruz pointed out in his video, but probably less frequently called upon. But if we can leverage information and make that more accessible to served agencies, then we become more valuable. And so this info is on the Vicksburg Amateur Radio Club website, which I built for them. And it's co-authored with their president, Chris Dunn, AF50Q. So I was very glad to finally get something in QST. Also received Square SDR2, and it complements my Hermes Light 2 SDR transceiver I've had for a couple of years. This is very well made. It's turnkey when it arrives, and it works marvelously. And they've upped the ante, put a fan on top. Its duty cycle is a little bit better than the first version was, and it works well with Thetis. Now, there are a couple of other pieces of software that will work with this and with the Hermes Light. Now, this one will probably go in my shack as a third rig to complement my Flex 6400 and my FTDX10 from Yaesu. My estimates are at 5 watts into my Palstar LA 1K amp, which I never drive to its full potential here in an HOA neighborhood. It should output between 75 and a little over 100 watts out, depending on the band and antenna match. So I was glad to acquire that. I'm also joining the board of the Jackson Amateur Radio Club, one of the oldest in the state, and it's now being called the Jackson Metro Amateur Radio Club, serving 6 metro counties. It's my second time on that board. I'm building a new website for the club and the Capital City Hamfest, which comes up in January, and it's the largest Hamfest in the state, and also developing new marketing strategies for the club. So I'm glad to be of some service. And I've done this for the other club in town, Central Mississippi Amateur Radio Association, as well as the Vicksburg Club, which is about an hour west. So given my shoulder and PT and that I've got 90 degrees of flexibility in my shoulder, I'll try to be very careful, but I hope to get back to completing that 20-meter ground plane work very soon. So still here and may not be kicking as high as I have been, Martin, but I am back in the saddle.
Yeah, you've been very busy, and as I keep telling you, don't overdo it, Frank. You know, you want to make sure this shoulder operation works properly. Leslie, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Right, what have I been getting up to? About a month or so back, I purchased a X6200 HF QRP set, HF and 50 megs. A Xylo, I think it's Xylo. I can't pronounce that word, but never mind. You know the radio, and I've been playing with it, both at home and at the local hill, Pole Hill, which is a very high site in Chingford. And all the other thing as well, which we've had, should we say, some tad of warm weather. It's been about 32, so the equipment started to get rather hot, and so I had to pack it away rather quickly. But anyway, had a couple of contacts, and I've looked at the antenna side and been building some brackets and bits and pieces so I can improve the antenna side of things. I'm still trying to keep it lightweight. I don't want to be carrying loads of stuff. So it's that balance between trying to make the station as efficient as possible, but not to get, it's all got to go in the backpack, guys. So it's got to be as simple as possible. So that's what I've been doing, and the bracket. So that's what I've been doing. Over to you, Martin.
Well, you've been having some fun, and I think it's pronounced Zygu, because I've got a Zygu.
Zygu, yes, that's the one, yes.
Yeah, I've got a Zygu G90, and I bought the cooling fan to go underneath it, and I was thinking for the last year, did I waste my money? And then for the last 2 days, we've had 35 degrees in the UK centigrade, which is about 93, 94 Fahrenheit. I don't think I wasted my money. So, yeah. Martin, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Not as much as the other guys, clearly. I have been, annoyingly, because we're having some building works done at the moment, I've had to take all my antennas down. I don't even have a long wire or anything up for radio at the moment. The only thing that I have is a CB aerial at the bottom of my garden, which kind of works for 10, 11, 12 meters. It will tune up on 20, but isn't very efficient. I have been tuning around prior to taking those antennas down. It is amazing. Weirdly, it's amazing how busy the CB band is at the moment. There were like 15 channels in use the other day. I was quite shocked by that. Otherwise, I've been listening to using some of the Kiwi SDRs online, and you can dial into them from around the world. Having a listen to some of the stuff, it's incredible the stuff that you can hear that's still out there, including, I think I've mentioned before, AM radio in some parts of the world is still very, very, very active. Whereas you listen to one in the UK and there's just next to nothing there. I've had a little bit of mobile operation on 4 meters, although annoyingly, again, my car had to go in for its yearly MOT tests, the annual safety check we have to do in the UK. It was a new garage. It was a garage I hadn't used before, so I took the radios out of the car in preparation for that, because I didn't know the garage. Nothing against him personally. I don't know this guy. I'm going to just take anything out that doesn't need to be in there. Working through, obviously, we've had an issue with our repeater. You and Phil went up there the other day. I'm sure you'll come to that. So obviously talking, you through to some extent, doing some stuff remotely on that. So thanks for that. As I mentioned, some of the errors, my errors on the roof had to all come down. It's amazing how rusty things are. Okay, the pole I've got was a proper pole for, it's a proper mast. And it's amazing how rusty that is. Admittedly, I've had it best part of 30 years, but that one won't be going back up. I'll be using, when it does come to put them back up, I'll be using something different. But even some of the U-bolts and stuff that is designed to hold an antenna, very, very rusted through it. It's probably a good thing it did come down. The other thing I noticed as well is my HF aerial is, it's essentially speaker wire that I have separated the two cores on one either side. And the plastic sheath of it is sticky. You know how some things get sticky in, the bad weather or, particular types of weather. The whole cable was sticky all the way along. I thought, that's unusual. So when it comes to actually putting that back up, I'm going to have to look at getting some alternative cable to put on there instead. And the only other thing, sort of radio related, I've been looking at some stuff on YouTube, and I've stumbled across this guy who was involved in the pirate radio scene. And back in the sort of the 90s, and listening to the stories he's telling about how resourceful they had to be. Yes, it's illegal, but you've kind of got to admire their resourcefulness of not just getting power in places that you can't get power to easily, but using like 10 gigahertz horns and things from the top of traffic lights to provide a studio transmitter link and things like that. You think there's some incredible things, things that you just didn't realize happened. In fact, I remember seeing antennas on top of one of the tower blocks that you talked about back in, this is the one at the top of Sutton Martin. Back in the 90s, I remember at the time, I'm like, I wonder what that's for. Now I know because he talks about that particular one, but yeah. Other than that, I don't think there's very much else going on with radio. So my hotspot I've had to disconnect as well because I've had to pull all my coax back into the loft. So it's quite quiet at the moment.
Well, there you go. Well, I worked for one of the guys that was a pirate in the died. I worked for his sister when they went legitimate, and they now sell broadcast transmitters. I worked for them for about 2 years. So, I know a few of the pirates from the 90s, and it was a different way of doing things. Right, what have I been up to? Well, I had to start from the bottom of my list and work up because I realised that's the most sensible way of doing it. QMX Plus, there's new firmware. Hans has rewritten the firmware for the QMX Plus, not for the QMX. This is a special version for the QMX Plus, but it turns out that if you jiggle the power cable, you can put it into an awkward situation which will burn the PA transistors out. And Hans produced a video showing how he got it into that state. You've really got to be unlucky to get it in that state because it took Hans a long time to work out how to get it in that state. So it's not something that happens regular, but he's improved the software, so that's good. For those of you who used to use dashboard.icqpodcast.com for the digital talk group, for about 3 weeks it didn't work. And I've left it with Colin anyway. I took it on, had a look at it, and I was struggling a bit. My friend Mark, who lives in the Virgin Islands, was over in the UK, and I've known Mark 30, 40 years. In fact, I taught him his foundation intermediate licenses. Him and I sat down and we fixed it. So if you want to look at what's going on the ICQ Podcast digital group, dashboard.icqpodcast.com now works. It was a DNS issue. It now works. As Martin said, GB3XP repeater, the original nice Yaesu repeater is off air. It receives lovely. It just won't go into transmit. I think the transmitter's died. Spent as much time as I could on it. Couldn't get it to go. It will go back to Yaesu, and hopefully they'll fix it soon for us. So that's that one. I've got to talk to him. Have been on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, as I would normally tell you. So that's another thing I get up to. And also, I've had a bit of a go on the talk group. That's not been that busy, but I did work a few people and it's been great. But as always, the other one is I've also been playing with All-Star Link. And I built an All-Star Link hotspot a while ago, not intending to link it with the ICQ digital talk groups, but it is I do have an access node. And last but not least, Hinsdale. So some of you may not know where Hinsdale is. It's, I think, a suburb of Chicago. Well, it's very, very close to Chicago. So I'm not wishing to upset anybody who lives in Hinsdale. And I know a nice gentleman called Scott lives there. They have a repeater, and I believe it is K9ONA. And in the mornings, they have the Grumpy Net. Well, it was afternoon for me, but I joined the Grumpy Net in Hinsdale. There were 33 people on Monday, and Tuesday. 33 people on Tuesday. That was a good chat. So most enjoyable. I went in on All-Star Link, and for those of you who got All-Star, it's 419310. So if you link your hotspot to 41930 early morning time in the US, you can go on the Grumpy Net. And if you join the Grumpy Net 3 times, they make you an official Grumpy and they give you a Grumpy Net number. So, yeah, I quite liked it. It was a bit of fun, but yeah.
I couldn't possibly comment, Martin.
That was a bit of fun, but the thing was, there were 33 people on this net, which was good.
Yes, good.
Good. So that's what I've been up to anyway, having a bit of fun. So all that's left to me to do now is thank you guys for turning up, and we move to the next part of the podcast. I'd like to thank Mr. Martin Rothwell, M0SGL.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Yeah, glad to have you as always. I'd like to thank Mr. Frank Howell, K4FMH.
Thank you, Martin. I enjoyed it as always.
Yeah, great fun as well, Frank. I'd like to thank Mr. Bill Barnes, WC3B, who didn't get the kids to drag him away today.
Nope, not yet. We're between seasons now, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Yeah, always enjoyable, Bill. No problems at all. Last but not least, our Leslie Butterfields, G0CIB. Nice to have you, Leslie, even if you did try and break the computer beforehand.
Thanks for having me on, Martin. It's not my fault, it's the Gremlins.
Yeah, okay. Okay. 73, guys, and we'll move to the next part of the podcast. 73.
See ya.
Cheerio.
73.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert-free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now we have a look at the news in brief from me, Colin M6BOY. We start with a Hamfest announcement that's been sent to us by Rusty, KI5 Romeo Uniform Sierra. And he lets us know about the Alamogordo, I think it's pronounced, Amateur Radio Club. It's their 40th annual Hamfest. It's an AWL-sanctioned Hamfest taking place at the Ottawa County Fairgrounds in North Maine. So it's going to be taking place on the 5th of September, and it's going to start 7 a.m. in the morning to about 3 o'clock-ish. Admission is free, and vendors can sell the day before. So you can pre-register for tables and ticket prizes, and say tables are €15 each if you want to be a trader. And they say there's a lot of electricity at most available locations, they say here. Prize drawing tickets postmarked before the 29th of August will be available, so you can give your support, etc., to the event by buying a ticket for a prize as well. So quite an interesting idea there for going about that there for you. The first prize, as I say, is roughly about £50 or $50, or say various other spot prizes will need to be paid for the shipping, etc., if you can't attend the event. So they've also got a FT710 as a first prize. They've got a Zygo G90 amongst a few things up for offer, so certainly worthwhile checking this one out, guys. They're also looking for people to do presentations, etc. So we'll pop a link to their webpage for you on ICQPodcast.com, so you can get in touch with the guys and support this event there in September. So hopefully everyone in the area will enjoy a great event. Now we have news here that a Dxpedition team to the South Georgia Island, and it's a Dxpedition team, Victor Papa Zero Sierra Golf, has fulfilled one of its many objectives, and they've added Megan EI5 Lima Alpha, a 19-year-old engineering student from the University College of Cork, as the third and final young operator. Megan will join Violetta KN2 Papa and Leon Delta Lima 3 Oscar November for next year's trip. Then there are 16 operators for North America and Europe who they hope to get on the air from the coveted DX location next year. So listen out for more information, but congratulations to Megan for getting your spot on this certainly a very valuable Dxpedition. Now we have news here about how to turn your Android phone into a ham radio transceiver. And this is a project that has been designed by Kilo Victor 4 Papa, and it's a homebrew 1 watt radio available for VHF and UHF that plugs into your Android phone. Transform it into a handheld ham transceiver completely off the grid. You basically simply plug into your USB-C port on your Android smartphone, and you have a fully fledged handheld radio transceiver, completely open source. As I say, lots of 3D printing files, etc. involved to let you do this yourself. It's small enough to fit in your pocket and take anywhere, and since there's no internal battery, it's the perfect radio to put in your go bag or in your car's glove compartment. So as I say, we've got links to the project and also to a video for you, and again all on ICQPodcast.com for you. And we finish up with news. WRTC is coming very soon in July, and ICOM UK have announced that they're going to be joining their cousins in America to be a sponsor of WRTC 2026. So the Olympic Games Amateur Radio will be supported by both ICOM America and ICOM UK. So congratulations there for the team for bringing on the ICOM UK team into their sponsorship, and as I say, I'm sure everybody will be looking forward to that event in July. Right, now we're going to join our features episode, which is a feature on new lead-free solder. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now for this episode's feature from the ICQ Podcast.
Hi guys, for this episode's feature, I wanted to talk about lead-free solder. Now, don't switch off, because this one could be really, really interesting to you. Having learnt to solder many, many years ago, well over 50, anything I remember, back in 1970, I went to work for Philips in their television factory in Croydon. And one of the first things you had to do was learn how to solder in their training school. And if you didn't pass, you didn't get a job at the end of the week. So soldering has been around for me for a very long time. And back then, a lot of us used to use 60-40 solder. Now, when I say 60-40, that's 60% tin and 40% lead. Now, the words 70-30 around, which is 70% tin, 30% lead. But as time has gone on, legislation has been passed because it's been realised that lead is a very, very dangerous metal to have laying around and put into landfill. So manufacturers of electronics equipment have switched over to lead-free solder years ago. However, us hobbyists haven't been effectively told not to use lead, but as time goes on, two things happen. Number one, if you want to buy solder with lead in it, it's probably going to become more and more expensive because nobody is making it these days, or not that I'm aware of. And secondly, there's a moral issue. You know, why are we putting lead into items that could end up in landfill and cause problems? not in the volume that manufacturers' goods would be, but it's still. So if we want to look after our conscience, lead-free solder is the way to go. Now, one of the biggest problems with lead-free solder, and we've all experienced this, is lead-free solder melts at a much higher temperature. And so you have to have your iron much hotter. Not too much of a problem, especially if you've got a temperature-controlled iron. But when you make these joints with lead-free solder, or the lead-free solder I've used up until this point, I've always found that it never really flowed very nicely, and once it had made the joint always used to look dull, as if it was getting close to a dry joint. What you kind of see with lead solder if you hadn't made a good joint. So I was never 100% confident, and I'll be honest with you, I've still got a fair amount of leaded solder. But I came across something that you guys might be interested in. So round about February time, I went to the Southern Manufacturing and Electronics Show. Now, that's a massive show in Hampshire at Farnborough Airfield, and the hall there is absolutely huge. In fact, if you wanted to spend more than a couple of days there, you certainly wouldn't see it all. Now, there's lots of things going on there, like machines for manufacturing and one thing another, bending metal and all sorts of things, soldering, the whole 9 yards. But one of the stands we wandered by, my friend Phil and I, as we were wandering around from Sutton and Chin Club, we came across a stand called DKL Metals. Now, I'm being brutally honest, I'd never heard of them before, didn't know they existed. Let's be honest about it. Well, I spoke to Brian Alder, who's their technical support manager, and we were talking about soldering, and he said to me, Martin, you haven't seen our product. Well, sure enough, I hadn't. I didn't even know they existed. But having a look at their product, he said, well, take this away with you. And he gave me probably about a foot, 18 inches worth of solder that they'd wrap around their finger and put in a little bag. So it wasn't a massive amount, but it was just a trial amount, which I was willing to give it a try. You know, I'm quite open about this. Anyway, I took it home. After a few days, I managed to solder a 40-pin header onto a Raspberry Pi Pico board, and the solder flowed lovely. And also it finished up with a nice shiny joint, exactly the way that the old leaded solder worked. So Brian had told me this. I pretty much half believed him at the time. I'm sorry, Brian, but we get there. You know, it's experience, so you have to have an open mind. So I was very impressed with this. Now, I meant to tell you guys on the podcast a long, long time ago, but unfortunately I lost the bit of solder with the label on, so I couldn't remember exactly all the details. This week, I found my little bit of solder with the label on it. So I contacted the company, and the company is DKL Metals. DKL Metals. Their website is dklmetals.co.uk, and you can see that they're not somebody who's only been around 50 minutes. They've been around a long time, and they make a lot of solder and soldering products for manufacturers. Now, I rung up asking for help, and I spoke to a lady in their sales department. Sorry I didn't get her name, but she was extremely helpful. She eventually tracked down Brian, and Brian rang me and said, yes, he remembered talking to me at the show. So that was a bit of a bonus. Moving on, I said, well, I was very impressed with this solder. Now, the solder I uses an alloy of SN100C, and the flux is Clean Flow M1. The size of the solder I had in my little evaluation was 0.7 millimeters, or 22 SWG, wire gauge there. So it was nice size, and it worked very, very well. then, as I said, the solder joints were clean. The solder flowed well, and it ended up with a nice shiny finish. However, great product for the big manufacturers, but I know that not very many big manufacturers will listen to us, but there are some smaller manufacturers that do listen to us, and a lot of hobbyists. And can you buy it? Well, unfortunately, DKL Metals only sell in quantity. But don't worry, they were very helpful. Brian suggested that I talk to one of their distributors. So there is a distributor in the UK that you can get this solder from. There is a company in the UK that will sell this solder to amateurs and hobbyists, and their name is SureClean. So pronounced SURCLEAN, and their website is once again SURCLEAN.co.uk. They will sell you a 500-gram reel if that's what you want. Now, I'm going to be hard on this and say, like all products at the ICQ podcast review, we don't get paid for this. Now, in fairness, I've not asked for anything from DKL Metals, and I wouldn't accept it if it was offered. All we like to do is bring you good product that works. So in fairness, I found this solder very, very useful. And if your morals are that we shouldn't be using lead metal within our solder, then I think this could be a very, very interesting product. It's certainly worked much, much better than any of the other lead-free solder I've used. So, long term, I think it's a really good product. I thank Brian Alder, who's the technical support manager for DK Metals, for his time. And, guys, if this is of any use to you, please give them a look up. If you find that you can't find the details because I haven't been clear enough in this interview, contact me at martin.icqpodcast.com. I hope this was of interest.
Well, everybody, I really hope you enjoyed Martin's feature on the new lead-free solder he found, which just proves the point that, to say you can be doing anything, as I say, as you go around your busy day and find something of very great use to us in the amateur radio world. So, as I say, certainly something to keep an eye on, and so it will help a lot of our kit builders out there as we move to more modern products, etc., for our kit building. The mention at the top of the show, our next digital talk group net is coming around very soon. It's on the 6th of June and will take place at 1200 UTC. I say maybe you might want to chat to Martin about this new solder product he's found and find out how you might better use it more in your projects, etc. So do find out how to get on the air on that talk group by going to ICQPodcast.com, and so you can find out all the information you need how to join that digital talk group and join us on the 6th of June. Whilst at ICQPodcast.com, click on the donate page and you can show your support for your ICQ podcast. Just turn the value you got from today's show into a monetary figure and send it our way. And I say everything that we collect in goes towards our running costs and keep your ICQ podcast advert free for you. So I really do hope you do to continue to support us kindly as you do. Well, that wraps up episode 484 of your ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. We really do appreciate your continued downloads and support. And as I say, continue to enjoy our hobby. And we'll catch you again in a fortnight's time. 73's all.